Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Well, busy week again on Capitol Hill, where the White House is now actively involved in negotiating to get President Biden's Build Back Better Act over the finish line. To fill us in on where things stand is Marianna Sotomayor, Washington Post congressional reporter. Marianna, welcome back to Washington Post Live. Or to First Look, actually. All right, so what are the top issues that remain to be resolved?
Well, Biden yesterday during that CNN town hall gave away a lot of where he
Yeah.
is, where Manchin and Sinema are. And they, of course, are those two senators who, as Biden put it, everyone can be a president in a 50-50 Senate at this point when you're talking about reconciliation. So, a number of things that have been more or less put in place that were questions during this week are really that child tax credit provision that is going to be staying in. Biden says that Manchin's request to means test to have work requirements likely is actually not going to be a part of that. The question that remains, though, is whether it is going to be extended for 1 year or more. Biden had previously floated it would only be 1 year, and that really irritated a number of Democrats in the caucus, since they want to see that made permanent. There are a number of other things that he's also mentioned, like Medicare expansion, for example, that remains in question. That, of course, is Senator Bernie Sanders' huge promise on the campaign trail. He, of course, wants to do Medicare for all, but he was at least proposing at least some expansions to dental, vision, and hearing. Biden says that there could be some vouchers for dental work. Those provisions, of course, still being worked out in terms of how much money to give. And then there's also some other provisions when it comes to paid family leave. That's been a big thing for Democrats who really want to go on the campaign trail and talk about how they've been helping women and families. That time frame was proposed at 12 weeks, and it's now down to 4 weeks. Biden saying he can't move any more than those 4 weeks. And it's also worth pointing out climate. That is a big thing for Democrats, who, of course, have been on the campaign trail and promising to really cut emissions, try and curb as much climate change. Biden actually pointing out that a provision that Manchin was really against, a clean energy provision, likely still going to be in there, noting that Manchin has said he could be convinced. So Biden and, of course, a number of Democratic members really working Manchin on that front.
Mm-hmm. Marianna, the thing about that town hall last night is, and you walk through all of this really well, is how specific the president was about every provision. And you, as a congressional reporter, I mean, you've been walking those halls and trying to squeeze out information for weeks now. But there's the president of the United States sort of drawing the outlines of where things are. Explain to the audience how important what the president did last night was and the impact you think that will have on the action on the Hill today.
Yeah, like you said, so many reporters last night joking on Twitter, hey, I've been wanting and I've been reporting this out, and the president basically just said it out loud. And, having covered Biden on the campaign trail, he very much, it's actually not rare to have him kind of say everything that you've been reporting on at some point in time. I actually didn't think it was that surprising as much as many people have found it to be, because that is almost, when he's feeling very confident about things, he's very willing to chat, very willing to go out there and talk. If anything, it's usually his own press team and those close to him who have to rein him in from giving too much away during negotiations or, any conversation. So what it really means is that the Democrats are getting close. They're not bluffing. When earlier this week on Capitol Hill, we did see and sense some optimism among the Democratic caucus that they're getting closer. And you are now not just seeing that, but really hearing that from the president. And the president's involvement has been a lot more active with these members, really calling them up, trying to get them to a deal, and also saying these are where we can find compromise, rather than in the last couple of weeks, he was hearing a lot from members, asking them what they wanted. Now he's saying this is what we can achieve how do you feel about those things? But at this point, it's really time to compromise on a lot of these points.
So Mariana, then, and I know the president's remarks Thursday night were sort of late. So, if you haven't been able to reach out to your sources, let me know. But has there been any reaction from congressional moderates, from Democratic moderates and Democratic progressives to what the president said? And is there any indication that folks are still moving in the same direction, even with the president being very specific on where he sees things right now?
Yeah, like you said, this morning I've been texting a lot of different aides and members trying to get a sense of where they are. But we have known, at least since early this week, a lot of these positions. We just didn't know how set in stone they were, as Biden made it seem last night. And really, the overall reaction has been some disappointment from moderates and also progressives who, for example, really want to make sure that cutting prescription drug costs is included in this bill. Biden didn't really mention it last night, and it's something that Democrats are still working for, but that could be a really big disappointment. Some things like, for example, that child tax credit, how long it's going to last, or paid family leave. There are some Democrats who are passionately trying to make sure it lasts more than those 4 weeks, but it seems like that concession won't be made. So it is a frustrating time. Democratic leaders for several weeks have been saying, we're reaching a point where difficult decisions will have to be made, and you're seeing those reactions, but it's not enough for any member so far to have drawn a red line and say, I'm absolutely not going to vote for this. Democrats, from the beginning, when they've been trying to even start discussing this Build Back Better agenda and what it would look like, they have been united in the fact that they see this as their only opportunity possibly to pass any kind of reforms. This is likely, the House could flip and have a Republican majority soon. So Democrats, the lesson from the Obama administration and the Affordable Care Act days is we have to pass as much as possible, because who knows when we'll have the majority in the House, the Senate, and the presidency. No matter how thin those margins are, we just have to pass something.
Right, and I keep saying that on paper a presidential term is 4 years, but in reality, in 2021 reality, it really is just 1 year. We're running out of time, but I got to get you quickly on the January 6th Select Committee. The committee voted to hold Steve Bannon in criminal contempt. The full House voted to hold Steve Bannon in criminal contempt, and got, if I remember right, 8 Republicans to vote with Democrats to make that happen. What happens next?
Yeah, so there were surprisingly 9 Republicans, 2 of which actually weren't part of that impeachment 10 group who you usually expect to vote in favor of things like this. But, the committee is moving very quickly. And yesterday was definitely a signal, not just by this committee, but also the full House, to any witness that they might call forward, that they aren't holding back at passing or at holding votes to hold someone in contempt. So as of right now, I think the committee has subpoenaed dozens of people who have allegedly helped coordinate, Stop the Steal, social media groups, to just try and gather information. And so far, everyone besides Bannon has been cooperative to a point. But we should expect likely that they call forward and they ask more people involved for more documents. If they don't cooperate, then they will be subpoenaed. Likely we should expect some closed door depositions in the next couple of weeks. And, there still remains the question of whether this committee will bring forth Republicans currently serving in Congress, like House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, to testify in any sort of way. So that's some of the couple of things to expect in the next couple of weeks, but they're moving quickly.
Right, and also Congressman Jim Jordan, and also looming large over all of this, particularly on the Steve Bannon criminal contempt, is what the Attorney General is going to do about it. So we're all sitting on the edge of our seat wondering what he's going to do. Marianna Sotomayor, we are out of time. Thank you very, very much for coming back to First Look.
Always fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We're going to keep the conversation going with our opinions roundtable in a moment. Stay with us. Let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find my colleagues, Hugh Hewitt and Donna Edwards. Hugh, Donna, welcome back to First Look.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Okay, so as I was talking with Marianna Sotomayor moments ago, last night, CNN town hall with the President of the United States, where he put everything out there. She and congressional reporters for weeks, if not months, have been trying to get hard and fast outlines of what the reconciliation bill would look like. The president went out there and talked specifics. I would like to hear from both of you, but Donna first, your reaction to what you heard out of the president in terms of the specifics of what this reconciliation deal could look like.
Well, President Biden put it all out on the table. I was so impressed, frankly, that you can tell he's deeply engaged in the details. He knows where all of the members of the Democratic caucus are in the House and the Senate. And he laid out, some people are not going to be happy with it, but I think he laid out what looks like the framework for the bill that will ultimately pass, the priorities around child care and the child tax credit. We know that he ditched the community college provision, which was near and dear to his heart, saying he'd give up something in order to get some other things. We saw the parameters of what might be the climate provisions in the package. I thought it was actually quite a robust description of where this is headed. And, we know that he wants a bill sooner rather than later. And it's important for Democrats to come on board to do that. And it sounded like there has been real progress made in the negotiations.
So, Hugh, in the town hall, many times, the president mentioned Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema about what they're for and what they're not for, and how they're, making it impossible to do this for this much amount of time. And I guess my question to you is, how much fun is it for you and other conservatives to watch Democrats negotiate amongst themselves like this in public?
Oh, it's a great occasion for joy. But I have to confess, you two are being good reporter analysts, being very diligent. I'm wearing my Browns tie because last night on Thursday Night Football, the Cleveland Browns beat the Denver Broncos in Cleveland. I've been a season ticket holder for the Browns since '99, so I didn't watch a minute of it. I had to watch it on replay this morning when I got up to do my radio show. And I'll tell you, Joe Manchin should do the town hall. Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin should be there because the president basically said, as I watched it on replay, it's up to them. And Joe Manchin gave a big goose egg this week. I'm comfortable with zero, Bernie. They got into it. So I am, when your opponents are busy destroying themselves, don't get in the way.
But I mean, okay, but yeah, Senator Manchin and Senator Sanders got into it. The reporting says it was an F-bomb fueled argument between the two of them. But reporting this morning says, as a result of that sort of cathartic release between the two of them, that there is movement, positive movement, happening between the two of them on certain things that the two of them don't agree on. Donna, do you think that they will indeed come to some sort of agreement, if not today, on a framework, if not today, in time for two things: the president's trip overseas to the COP24 meeting or COP26 meeting, and in time for the November 2 Virginia gubernatorial election?
Wow, that's a lot of deadlines packed into 1 week. I think it's going to be complicated to do that. They may be able to come up with a framework. I hate to put these deadlines because they're somewhat artificial when you're in the midst of negotiations. But time is running out for Democrats. They do not have all of the time in the world. And frankly, if Democrats want to be successful, whether it's on November 2nd with the Virginia governor's race or it's in 2022, they need to just get this done because they won't even have time left to campaign on it if they continue to run out the clock. So, I liken this, on the football analogy, we are in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl and really in the 2-minute warning. So Democrats really got to get going on this.
There's way too much football talk going on in this conversation for me to even keep up. Hugh, let's keep talking about the Virginia governor's race.
Perfect.
The Monmouth University poll that came out this week was, it just sent shockwaves through the Commonwealth because it showed that Terry McAuliffe, popular former governor, Democrat of Virginia, is tied with Glenn Youngkin, the Republican Donald Trump endorsed candidate for governor in the Commonwealth. From your perspective, why is Terry McAuliffe having such a hard time pulling away from Glenn Youngkin in the polls, at least?
Pulling away, he's drowning. I feel very good about this. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts and Republicans commenting on Democrat-Republican races, right? So adjust for the lie of the green. Mix my metaphor there on you, Jonathan. I think Glenn Youngkin is winning, and handily, because of the education issue. And there's an old rule in politics, and Donna's run and won, so she knows this. If you're talking about your opponent's attack when people are voting, that's not a good sign. And in Virginia, everything has been about Terry McAuliffe not only stepping on a rake, but stepping on the same rake 7 times, parents and education and school boards. He did it in their last debate. He came out with the perfunctory, Glenn Youngkin's taking me out of context, which they immediately bounced back at him like another hot take, another rake in the face. Education, education, education. Who controls education? And did the Virginia public school systems do well during the COVID shutdown? The answers are parents control and no. And that is fueling Glenn Youngkin's surge.
Donna, I take Hugh's point about Terry McAuliffe's comments on education at that, and having to explain it at that last debate. But after that debate, Glenn Youngkin had to explain why it was folks were pledging allegiance to a flag that flew during the insurrection at a rally for him. He was not there. Let's put it out there. He was not there. But why do you think that that was something that played to McAuliffe's benefit? One, and two, does that incident, which gave Terry McAuliffe an opportunity to once again tie Glenn Youngkin to Donald Trump, will that be helpful to McAuliffe in overcoming what has been, the political narrative that there's an enthusiasm gap among Democrats for Terry McAuliffe, and that is also why he is, to use Hugh's descriptor, drowning in the polls?
Well, look, I think when you have a neck and neck race, you can't really describe it as drowning. But I do think that Democrats, Terry McAuliffe, are going to have to really work on turnout for this election. This was always going to be a turnout election. You have an election coming off of a presidential year. You've got to go out there in Virginia and get all of those voters out. And so that was the challenge that the McAuliffe campaign was facing and that Democrats are facing in Virginia. But that was always true. I think that, Terry McAuliffe has been right to point the linkage between Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin around issues dealing with face masks and vaccinations, and wrapping himself up with, especially during the primary season, with Donald Trump. And, you can't get away from that. I mean, Trump has already said, my eyes are on Glenn Youngkin. And so they are tied at the hip. And I think it's important to remind Virginia voters of what they're going to get. And that flag on the heels of, the tragedy in Charlottesville, I think Glenn Youngkin is in a really dangerous place here. And I think it's right for Terry McAuliffe to point out what that danger is. But they've got to get on every door and every voter to turn out voters, and maybe to buy a narrow win in Virginia.
Donna, I kind of know what Hugh will say to this, but I want to ask you this question. If Terry McAuliffe loses, or conversely, if Glenn Youngkin wins, is that, I'm trying to remember who said this saying that if Terry McAuliffe were to lose, it's not only, the canary in the coal mine is dead, meaning Democrats in 2022 are in deep, to use a technical term, doo-doo. Do you agree with that?
I don't know if I agree with that, but look, I have always thought that 2022, if you just look historically, is going to be a tough year for Democrats. There's no question about it, and it begs the question of Democrats really being aggressive about getting this Build Back Better plan and the infrastructure plan passed so that it can be at people's doors. And so there's a lot that is going on with the with the McAuliffe campaign. I think that they can pull it out in the end, but I don't know that that is necessarily a referendum on what's going to happen in 22. It's going to be a tough 2022 election anyway.
So late last night, a spokesperson for the family of the late Secretary of State Colin Powell announced that a memorial service will be held at the National Cathedral on November 5th at noon. It'll be an invitation-only memorial service. Hugh, I'll start with you and then come to you, Donna. This just, America lost a giant when, with the passing of Secretary Powell, first Black National Security Advisor, first Black Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, first Black Secretary of State. Hugh, what did our nation lose when Colin Powell left us?
Great American, a statesman. I was at the Nixon Library, which I'm the president of, with Brett Baer on Monday night when Secretary Powell passed. And the show began with a picture of Colin Powell as a White House fellow with Richard Nixon. So take that in. He always credited that White House fellowship with giving him a taste for the Beltway, which he ended up turning into a complete mastery of it. And for 50 years, Colin Powell has served the country with grace and dignity, and at personal risk, because he served, I believe, 2 tours in Vietnam, saved 3 people off of a burning helicopter, as I recall the story. And I know that some people used it as the occasion to bring up the WMD controversy. He gave it his best shot. The world believed there were WMD in Iraq. And I think Secretary Powell is the finest example of an American who served America whenever his president, no matter which party, asked him to.
One second, Donna. Hugh, you mentioned that Secretary Powell served this nation with grace and dignity, and I agree with you 100%. What I would love to know from you is your reaction to the undignified and ungraceful statement issued by former President Trump on the passing of Colin Powell.
Unfortunate. I really do wish, if you don't have anything nice to say about someone who's just died, don't say anything. Because, look, most of the country, 95% of the country, joins with me and every other Republican I know to say there was a man. And to throw pebbles at a battleship is not effective nor self-serving. I don't get it. But in any event, my approach has been, I talk about Colin Powell, not what people say about Colin Powell, either the critics from the left or the right.
Donna, I would argue that there were many, many, many Democrats who also mourn Colin Powell.
Oh, they did, absolutely. Please,
well,
they did.
You know what? Let me just say, I count myself among them. Jonathan, I grew up in a military family. My dad, 30 years in the Air Force. I know in our family, we looked at Colin Powell and his character, his leadership, his service. And, despite, differences of opinion about Iraq and WMD, that really pales in comparison to the long-standing leadership and service of Colin Powell. I went to Wake Forest University, and recently Colin Powell and Madeleine Albright spoke on our Character and Leadership Council, on which I serve, talking about the importance of moral clarity when it comes to leadership. He spoke at one of our commencement addresses. I think that he stands tall among Americans, and as has been suggested in our friends group, we think in this discussion about how we rename some of these military facilities, taking away those Confederate names, that Colin Powell's name should be on one of those facilities someplace. And so I hope that the lasting legacy of Colin Powell is going to be his clarity, his leadership, his character, and that we honor him in the way that we should for his service.
We've got less than three minutes to go. I'm just wondering, Hugh, is that era that Secretary Powell was a part of, grew up in, represented, is that era gone? Can we get back to those ideals that drove statesmen like Secretary Powell?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Donna's. I hadn't thought of that, and you're absolutely right, Donna. Fort Powell should be somewhere. There ought to be 4 of them, and many high schools, and many colleges, and many statues. I don't think it's ever gone away, John. People forget. I was in the Reagan White House. Everyone remembers the Reagan years now with a glow. It was brass-knuckled, knockdown, kick them in the stomach politics. And Colin Powell did that in D.C. as well as anyone with Richard Armitage. So yes, he's a great American, but he fought through the same stuff that we are fighting through today, because it's the only way in a free society to reach the dialectical end.
And Donna, 30 seconds left.
Well, look, I think that Colin Powell stands in his leadership, but I think that there are many members of the military, people who are in public service, who stand in that gap too, and we need to begin to elevate them so that we can reclaim the kind of moral leadership that we've always had and have embraced. And Colin Powell represented that, and we need more of that in our public life.
Yeah, more of it in our public life, and more people doing it publicly rather than behind the scenes. Donna Edwards, Hugh Hewitt, as always, we got to go just when the conversation starts getting good. Thanks for coming back to First Look. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
See you, Donna.
All right, and head to WashPostLive.com to find out more information about next week's interviews and to register. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Thank you for tuning in to First Look.